rotate?
Either one. So let's talk about rotation, but if you remember from the last class, let me just make sure we're live. Starting live. All right. So if you remember from the last class where we did the financial independence app, I am simply going to use our initial, oops, I moved that. That's right. So in the repository, under example code, I've added this a couple days ago. You can now get access to this. So I'll build this out for us, and this will essentially be your first project, but come up with your own idea. So again, it's a calculator app, but don't do what I'm doing. If you do have an idea for your final project, then use this opportunity to start that process. Even if you throw it away and then restart it, which you probably want to do because you'll be in there and just mucking stuff up, creating classes that you don't need and realize there's better ways of doing it. But if you want to, you can use this as an opportunity to start building your final, whatever that is. Okay, so for this application, if you remember, we have a UI label. So this is considered an output. We're displaying information to the user. And I'll do all this all over again, but if you remember, we hooked up this UI label to this variable called hello label, and it is of type UI label. And then in the viewDidLoad method that gets called, so this is kind of when our view controller, which is the when the view gets loaded, our view controller takes over, and that's basically just this first screen. We'll go over this probably in another class, but I'm just going to give you the basics. ViewDidLoad means that the view's it loaded and we're ready to start manipulating our UI. So we have that label object, and we're going to set the text to hello Boise State. So if I run this really quickly, and then this is our output to the user. So our calculator app is going to take two inputs, and it's going to do something to them. If your application requires more inputs, that'll be, obviously you'll get more points on that. And this is running in the background apparently. There we go. Loading, loading, loading. Anyway, it just says hello Boise State. Let me just put this over, click and drag and hold, and then drag it. Okay, so instead of it saying label, eventually, someday, hopefully tonight, it will change that text. Yeah, so usually it'll pop up into the foreground automatically, which is a really nice feature because if you're ever using Android Studio, their emulator just sits in the background, and I'm just like waiting for it. And then oh yeah, it's not like iOS. So just a comparative there. So there you go. Hello Boise State. So okay, now we want to create some input types. This stuff I'm just going to make up. I'm not going to get too complicated with it, but I am going to show you how to do this. So I'm going to make sure my storyboard, these are storyboards, and if you've ever worked in like video editing or making a movie, storyboards just show like, here's the first scene and then it transitions to this scene. It actually looks a lot like how we design iOS applications. We'll have multiple views over here and how they connect and everything like that, but we'll get there another day. But that's why they're called storyboards. If you hit Command-Shift-L, or go up into the top left-hand corner and press this little widget button with all of our widget library. It'll pop up this popover, and we can type in something. And if you don't know, you can kind of just scroll through here. So here's our UI switch. There's UI sliders. Go crazy with this stuff. I award more points on projects, those extra 20%, when you implement something that we haven't talked about in class. So go off on your own. Figure out how these things work, include it in your application, and I will be impressed. But for the meantime, we're going to use a text field. So when you select that, you got to click and drag. And my computer's going to be a little slow, probably because of the streaming. And hopefully, yeah, sorry, we were 10 minutes over, so Michael on the stream was wondering where I was. Okay. Yes. So hopefully he can hear me on the stream. Let me know. Okay, so here's my text box. We can type anything on here. I'll show you that in a second. Now, instead of hitting Command-Shift-L and doing that whole process again for my text field, I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key, same key, click and drag, oops, click, hold, drag, and that will just simply duplicate that object. So it's just a really quick way of making multiple UI objects without having to go through that scene again. Especially after, like if I hit Command-Shift-L, it'll go up to this button again, top right-hand corner. This might not be, text fields might not be selected, right? I might have added buttons in the meantime, etc. So anyway, just kind of a faster way of doing that. So we got two text fields here, and then I am going to add a button. And you can see that button doesn't look, well, you could probably barely see it, but it doesn't look too much different than a label. So Apple, as many other companies have done, is done the flat design. So if we want to make this stand out, we can go ahead and add its background somewhere here. There it is. I don't know if you can see that way in the back, but it looks like a, I don't know what flag that looks like. That looks like some kind of country's flag, but it's a white background with a red slash through it, and that is going to mean transparent. So we can select any of these colors. We can select all these default colors, like there's a scroll view, table view cell, clear color, custom. So if you do custom, this is where we got our colors from last class. Okay, so black, gray, etc. My crayon box, my colored pencil box, and go back and select that. Or I can use the Eyedropper tool. And if you didn't see where that is, it's right there. If you can't see, sit closer to the front. But if I select that, it gives me this cool little magnifying glass that I can choose this color if I want to. I can pull up an image, try to do it that way. Select another object on here, etc. So I'm just going to select one of these blues. Hopefully it's not an anti-aliased part of the letter. And get the same exact color. Now I should change the text color of my button, my text on my button. And you can select maybe, let's say, white. Or let's say select one of these colors. But as you noticed, it changed the background, not the color. So I think this is a bug in Xcode, and it's been around literally forever. But when you pull up the custom color palette, let's go back to, okay, let's select this blue. I don't know if this is the official Boise blue, but that's or Blanco blue. But I'm going to save this color, so I'm going to click and drag the color into my Save Color palette, and there it goes here. And so now when I select my button, I'm going to actually close this, and then when I have my button selected, go back to text color, do custom color, and then I can select that saved palette color, or maybe not. Again, I think this is a bug. There we go, and then, okay, there we go. See, I don't know why it didn't work that time, but close it, select off of it, select it again, and it should work. Now, obviously, we don't want to make the same colors as that, so there we go. And then we have all sorts of different controls on here. We have the font. Now, the system font, I believe, is a font called San Francisco. You can look it up. That's just what that label is. But we can basically have all these different styles, or we can do a custom font if you want to go crazy. And let's do, if you know anything about design, people hate Comic Sans and Papyrus. So let's make that Papyrus. And I'm just going to hit this this toggle switch up and down, so it's 17 pixels, or font size of 17 points. Just going to make that a little bit bigger. Don't make it too big. That's obnoxious, but I'm just going to do that as a point so you can see it in the back. And then for this one, I'm going to change this system font to custom. And do I even have Comic Sans on here? Oh no, I don't have Comic Sans. What a tragedy. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to select this one. And we're going to increase that font size. Usually 48 is pretty good. Stay 46. Doesn't really matter. Anyway, let's call this one, well, we can do it programmatically. So if you, obviously if you do it programmatically, that means that it might change, or you could just do it in the UI builder here, or excuse me, the interface builder. Select off, select again if it looks like that, and change the text that's in there to Boise Food Finder, whatever it is. All right, let's talk about text fields really quickly, and then we'll move on in our lives. This doesn't look very interesting to a user, right? If I display this to a user, they would have no idea what to put in there. And to be honest, I don't know what to put in there either. But let's say it's a calculator app, and it's just going to calculate two numbers together. But again, we want to make sure that the user knows what to put in there. So we can put a label and just say, you know, this is the username, this is the first value, this is whatever. Or we can put it in the text field itself. And there's two drawbacks to that I'll talk about. In the placeholder text field on the right-hand corner, you know, let's say this is a login field. We can say username. And again, if you can't see that in the back, in our text field, it says username in gray. Let's run this really quickly. And this is a placeholder. So this will show up when there's no text in that text field. And then when we start typing it in, it goes away and gets populated with text that is black. Okay, so this pulls up automatically once it knows what it's doing. All right, so I tap in there and nothing happens, except for a bunch of output from my console. Actually, sorry, nothing happens, but usually you would see a keyboard pop up, but not on the simulator, because we have full access to our computer's keyboard. But if you're trying to enter an email address, let me show you. So Command-Shift-K will open up the keyboard. And you can see one of two problems. One, it partially covers that button. So I would have to test this on different devices, but I want to make sure my UI is actually sitting up in the top third of the application so that this doesn't happen. Or I can turn off autocorrect, which is what this is, or actually, excuse me, autocomplete. So if I type in something like that, you can see the autocorrect or the autocomplete, which is, there's memes and stuff on on funny words that this comes up with. But you can use that and kind of test out your application. Or you go, no, that's a bad idea because this is supposed to be a username or an email address. So I really want this to be an email address. So I'm going to close that. But you can see our placeholder text went away. And the other problem with the placeholder text is I don't actually know what goes in here once I start typing, right? Like I start typing, and if it's a long field, like let's say I'm filling out a mortgage application, don't do that on an iPhone, but you start typing in and you're like, oh wait, was that the interest rate or was that the interest points or what was that? Like I don't remember. Oh, so let me go ahead and delete all that stuff so I can see what the placeholder text is. Oh yeah, I was supposed to do whatever it is. So again, if there's a bunch of input fields, you can label those. Put a label, a UI label, either above it or next to it. But if it's something like this, you can just put in some placeholder. Also, the nice thing about placeholders is it gives the user a suggestion of what should go in there. So if they see an email address like username at u.boisestate.edu, then that person knows that they're expecting a Boise State email address. And maybe if they type in a Gmail address, they go, sorry, you have to have a Boise State edu account in order for this to work. But at least they can see that and they know. Okay, so I wanted to fix two things on this text field, and these will obviously give you more points if you implement these things on the second assignment. Is down here for text input traits, once my text field is selected, we have all these different kind of context-aware values that we can put in here that iOS will help the user input text on. So for example, if this text field is expecting a name, I can select the name or prefix name or given name or family name or nickname or something like that. And if I have my personal information entered into iOS, the keyboard will actually suggest that. There's a little pop-up that says, hey, do you want to put in your full name? And you can just tap that instead of typing in your name. So it's very, very convenient if the user has it set up. Job title, location, street address, these types of things. It gives iOS context-aware attributes that, again, it can help the user input that text. Yes, Ivy.
Well, this might be slightly off topic, but is there any form of text sanitization, or is that automatic with iOS?
In terms of like what you would deal with, like databases or something like that?
Yeah.
Yes and no. So you can still say like double quote, end parenthesis, space, drop table, right? Or drop all table. But obviously that doesn't work the same. Swift is a very type-safe language, so unless you're doing something crazy like taking the username and I guess you could send that to the server, and then the server would probably, hopefully, sanitize that for you. But if you want to do that on the iOS app, there's nothing built into this functionality to do that. However, what I will say is the next thing that we want to do is when we concentrate on user experience, again, not having people type in a whole bunch of stuff on a phone, is if we only want them to enter a number, like let's say this is a financial calculator, and we're only expecting a currency, so dollar amount and then the decimal and then cents, we can limit the keyboard to simply numbers. So let's just go ahead and do that just because it's fun. That would be keyboard type, somewhere in the middle here. And we have an ASCII capable, numbers and punctuation, URL, so that'll have like forward slashes and colons and other punctuation of that nature. Number pad, and then decimal pad. There's also one for Twitter, which I believe has a hashtag and an @ symbol on the keyboard, so you can @ people and then you can do hashtag, whatever. So that's kind of fun. I think that's the one that Instagram also uses because it's pretty much the same functionality. And then there's an ASCII capable number pad. So there's all sorts of different keyboards that we can type up. Actually, let's go ahead and do email address first because that's actually what we want to do for this app, assuming that username is an email address. I guess I didn't put that in there, but these are all things you have to think about when you're polishing up your application. Is one, how should I label these? Do I need to label these? Two, what's the keyboard that pops up? And you have to go through every single text field and set these. So usually when I'm going through my testing, I'll click on a text field and an ASCII keyboard pops up, and I'm like, ugh. So again, because I'm on the simulator, most of the time it's, oops, that again, command. It also has Siri. How do I get rid of Siri?
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
That's the response I always get from Siri. Come on, go away. There we go. I don't know why that's not working. Sorry about that. Okay, so Command Shift L. I had fat fingers. Okay, sorry. L is the palette. Okay, so here we go. We have an @ symbol, space, a dot for calm, etc. No big deal. But again, if we want to limit the, if it's a dollar amount, click on your text field. If it's a dollar amount, we go to decimal pad, and that's just like your number pad, but with a decimal point. So you can have strictly numbers. If you're asking the user to enter in a phone number, you can just do numbers because they obviously don't need decimals in their number. Okay, so when I select this checkbox, now we have just numbers, so I can type in 12.8, and that way I'm almost guaranteed that the input's going to be a number, so I can just send that to the server, and hopefully the server gives me a proper response. But when I say almost guaranteed, is some of these text fields, if I click and hold, or I tap and hold, I can select let's do select all. I can copy that. And no matter what these inputs are, paste that in here. And delete that. Hello. Oh, if the keyboard's up, I can't use my keyboard. I have to use the virtual keyboard down here. Paste in that. Actually, that's probably a terrible example because that is a number. But let's say, let's get rid of this keyboard. I usually don't have the keyboard up unless I'm testing it. Something like this. I forget what the exact command is, but let's say it's drop ball table, something like that, right? We're all familiar with that and sanitizing our data. So even though, again, I'm expecting a number, I'm only allowing the user to input there, do check for the fact that they can paste in whatever they want in there. So it's not foolproof. You can do all sorts of fun things in there. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I got the text from somewhere else, but then this keyboard here. Yeah, sorry. What was your question?
I was making sure that setting the keyboard.
Yes, just the input. That was all I changed, was just the input. I didn't change the fact that you can't enter in any text. There's a couple ways of doing that. Yeah, we won't get too much into it right now, but if you want to do like a phone number, for example, and as you're typing in the area code, and then you want to surround that by with parentheses as you're typing, and then put a hyphen after the 6th character and yada yada, all that fancy stuff. You can program that yourself, and there's callbacks on the text fields that as you're typing in, it'll give you the string that's currently in there, and you can figure it out. Or better yet, and I forget the website off the top of my head, but there's something called, what is it? Coco, shoot, I forget the name. I'll post it in the Discord. But it allows you, or there's a whole bunch of like code that people have created for fancy things like that, like entering phone numbers and all sorts of crazy cool things. Like if you want that button to animate when you press it, somebody has a block of code and you can download that. It's a lot of fun. We won't talk about that today, but that stuff exists.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead and back.
So I've seen a comic about like entering the drop table in the wrong spot. What exactly does it do?
Okay, real quick. So when people take like a username, let's see. Just throw that away. And for those on the live stream, my apologies. But when you're writing SQL code for databases, what you'll say is like, I'm just gonna do pseudocode, like username equals, and then start parenthesis, or excuse me, start quotes, and then some variable name that it gets from the input. Well, the variable name, instead of equaling Michael or something like that, could equal, like, I'll write it down here so you can see. I'm going to enter it in a field, and then what I wrote there is end quotes. I guess I need a semicolon. And then drop all, I forget the exact things, I don't usually do this, but drop all, and then I'll say the semicolon. So when I enter in, let's say I enter in something like var, right, and I don't sanitize it, meaning I just take whatever is in that input and drop it into my SQL for entering database stuff. What this actually replaces var with is everything in here. And I think I have to look that up again, but I have to somehow end that. So and yeah, something like that, and blah blah blah. Or yeah, anyway, not important. The fact is, it'll end this command and then actually do another command right after it, and it basically drops all your database tables, which means to delete them. So there's yeah. It's running the SQL query. So the query language is just strings that you enter in, just like, yeah, it runs it at one time. So you can enter in commands like that, and then it just interprets it and says, oh, okay, you're going to drop all your tables? Sure. Yeah, it's not compiled.
So you get a username that forces it to email you like database information with password and username.
Yep. Yeah, that's how all those not all of them, but that's a lot of how hacks work. People just type this into a data field, and it might return all the data. Some of those people will do that. They'll say, I forget the SQL command, but it'll just list all the tables, and then they'll run another command to select all from all those tables. And yeah, I mean, you can just type in SQL queries right into some of these things. However, if you sanitize your data, what it does is it escapes all of the double quotes and then makes this a string instead of ending the string and then running commands. So that's the way that you're supposed to sanitize your data. But that's beyond the scope of this. But I thought I'd mention it because you guys asked. So fun stuff. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to do, and then I'll let you guys go besides this. Okay, we have a bunch of data. The other thing I need to do besides getting this well, actually, I guess we haven't gotten it yet. So Control-click, drag this in, and I'm going to call this, let's just call it username text field. And then this one, click, Control-drag under this one. Don't select it because it'll hook up the same outlet to the variable. And this one will be called, I don't know, let's call it password text field. Just making stuff up as I go. Okay. 2 text fields. So that satisfies requirement 1 for the assignment. And then 1 button. So Control drag. And now I'll show you 2 things. So when I drag a button, I can also get a reference to that button, so I can change it programmatically, I can disable it, I can hide it, I can make it larger programmatically, I can do a whole bunch of things with it. But normally I don't care about it. I do care when somebody clicks it. So if I drag in near the top of the class, you can see it's going to be an outlet. So in other words, a reference to that UI element. I'm going to click off of that or hit escape, and I'm going to Control drag, but instead of dragging it to the top of that class, I'm going to drag it near the bottom. Also within the end parenthesis, so somewhere in here. And instead it adds an action. An action is when somebody interacts with that button. So specifically when somebody touches up inside, and I'm sorry that is really, really tiny, but that's what that says. And if you drop down that drop down, it has a whole bunch of other things like I can get notified when the user changes the value of the button. That doesn't make sense. It makes sense on the text fields, but not on the button. If they drag, if the touch drag exits, if it is a touch up outside, meaning if they tap on it, they drag their finger off and they release. I can also get notified of that. Otherwise, it doesn't select the button, etc. So there's a few options there. I don't think I've ever really changed that before. I've done it programmatically, but yeah, for other things. But anyway, so it's asking for a name, so I'm just going to say lowercase login button tapped. Okay, login button tapped. I usually end it with tap because it's an action and just lets me know that this one is being tapped. Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
When you change like hello label inside your storyboard, which one takes
Which text field takes precedence?
So if I were to click into my storyboard and change versus going to click hello label.
Oh, okay. I got you what you mean. Okay, so for this label, yeah, it says Boise Food Finder. Then when I run it, it says Boise State, right? Usually the programmatic one does because this gets loaded first, and then this callback happens. View did load. So this loads in, and then view did load gets executed, which will say Boise State. So if I comment that out, then that will have that static version of it. Okay, so yes, we have our button here. And somebody wants me to do Android tutorials, apparently. That's true. Those will come when I have time doing iOS, guys. Okay, so login button tapped. When I tap this button, this function gets executed. And what I want to do is I want to get the values out of these text fields. So I'm going to take the username text field, and I'm going to say let username equal text field dot text. Okay, it's a string. I'm going to say let password equals and password text field. So I'm just start typing that in. Password. There we go. All right, so those will pull the values out of the text field. If you don't have any text within those text fields, it just comes back as an empty string. So no big deal. All right, so this is giving me warnings because the initialization of a immutable. Actually, sorry. I won't read that, but essentially it's just saying I'm using these variables, but they're not being used. So it's not an error, it's just letting me know I have unused variables and I can optimize my code by not having those. But let's go ahead and just print, we're gonna print this out. Let's go for the label. Let's have an output label. So I'm just gonna click and drag here and then hook this up to another label. So click and drag near the top. This will create an outlet, and this will just be called output label. Okay, so the output label's text is going to equal. We can do username plus password. This is not usually what I do. Just maybe I should put password string. But you can concatenate those together, and you can think that that's going, you probably see that that's going to give us, one, an error, but also it would just squish them together. So how do we do proper string concatenation, or at least string formatting? So we can try to put those in there, but that doesn't work. Instead, what we have to do is wrap our, and actually I take away the plus here. So we're going to have space between them. And I can even say something like logging in, and then the user with password, colon, and then the password. So we want to use those variables inside of our string. The easiest way to do that is / and then contain our variable in parentheses, and do the same thing with password, backslash, I think I said / backslash, and just wrap that in a backslash parentheses. And that was what we call string interpolation. It's kind of a cool word, but that's what that is. And basically just formats, it'll replace these variables within a string, in that string. So let's go ahead and run this. I think everything's all set up, and I'll let you go. And any questions on the live stream if you guys are shy? All right, so we got our simulator coming up here. And we have obviously 2 labels. I would fix that through the QA process, right? Username, okay. Username is going to be 42. Oops, okay, I can't. That's why I usually have the keyboard, because I want to type on the keyboard. So 42. And the password is password. Oops, you guys saw that. So when we type, or when we tap on button, it says logging in, and then we see, I made that way too big, so that's why it says it. It's actually going to say optional, and then the value, and then all the other strings that we have in there. Okay, let's fix this really quickly. I lied to you. Let's fix this really quickly. I'm going to select our password. I'm going to check the box that says secure text entry, and then for our label, I'm going to make this bigger. And I'm going to add in additional lines. So right now it's at 1 line. I'm just going to go up to, I don't know, 7. And we're going to change this from 40 to 46. I'm trying to go fast, so Xcode's like, slow down. Let's change it to 22. And let's rerun this. Oh, sorry, I didn't change the optional. Okay, so it's not guaranteed that these come back as actual strings if username or username text field is not initialized or something else happens. there's something called an optional, which could be nil, or it could have a value in it. So to get rid of that error, we can select our warning and try to figure out what all this means, or we can just add an exclamation point after our variables, which just basically means we're sure that these values are not nil, which is a very dangerous assumption to make, right? Go ahead and what's called unwrap them and see what value is inside. If the value inside is not nil, then it just works. If the value is nil on the inside, then it could crash your application. But this is why this just works. Like, if it was nil, I could print it out, and now our password is protected. Hit the button, and you can see logging in with 42 with password, and then whatever I typed in there. So we don't see those optional wrappings. Let me turn off that wrapping on our password field. We'll get to optionals next class. But before next class, create me something like this. Again, following those recommendations, or those requirements, I should say, not recommendations. And come up with something interesting too. If you're more on the creative side of putting stuff in, again, it could be a financial calculator, it could be a mortgage calculator. I don't really care. It doesn't have to be a calculator. The more creative, the better. If you're not creative, add more functionality. Put in a switch, which I didn't talk about, but I'll talk about it next class. Alrighty, and we're going to end the live stream since nobody has any questions. Thanks, guys.